Hello, this is Anthony with Caton. Just let everybody know we're going to get started in just a minute here. I see a bunch of people coming in, so I want to give people a little bit more time. So we're just going to get started in about a minute here. All right, great. Why don't we get started? So, promise this is going to be the shortest webinar you've ever attended. We're going to keep this to about 25 minutes. I can't stand webinars that go on forever. You know, who has time anymore? So we're going to quickly talk a little bit today about modernizing the candidate experience. There's a Q&A section in there, so feel free to pose any questions throughout as we go. So modernizing the candidate experience, how virtual hiring solutions are transforming healthcare recruitment. We're going to talk about today how current market conditions are causing a bit of a strain on recruitment. I brought some really good data here today. We're going to talk about shifting towards a candidate-centric model, and then finally how to host a successful virtual hiring event. A little bit about me, for those of you who don't know me, I see some familiar faces here, but also some new ones. Anthony Gentile, Managing Partner at Caton Direct. I've been in the healthcare human capital space for almost 20 years now. I focus exclusively on sales, business development, and product. I'm also on the board of directors for the National Association of Healthcare Recruitment. So enough about me. Why don't we jump right in and kind of start with what I was alluding to earlier, some of those tough market conditions. Look, we all know healthcare talent acquisition and healthcare recruitment is really, really tough, but figured I'd bring some data here to really show kind of what the root causes of some of these problems are. According to the BLS, unemployment rate for registered nurses in particular in this country is 2.4% right now. They are all working. They're all gainfully employed. So there's not too many active job seekers out there. We see that the growth rate into four-year nursing programs is only 1.5% in order to meet demand of about 200,000 new jobs per year. We're not even coming close to that, right? So extremely, extremely low supply of talent. We see that 1 in 5, 20% of healthcare workers have left the workforce since the pandemic began, either due to burnout, stress, or retirement. You see in terms of demand for services, 10,000 Americans turn 65 every single day in this country. So, you know, we're getting older and we're getting sicker and we're running to our doctors and we're running to physicians' offices in droves. So it's becoming, you know, putting an enormous strain and enormous stress on our healthcare system. We see also that where this all culminates is in financial burdens and financial concerns. So according to Lean Human Capital, right now, current cost of vacancy for a nurse is $350 per day per nurse per shift. Average time to fill is about 52 days. So you do the math on that, the average agency nurse employed for over a year is costing organizations over $60,000 per year. Okay, multiply that by 10 or 100, or in some instances, 1,000, depending on the size of your organization. And you could see why organizations are collectively spending over $17 billion a year, basically renting nurses. Okay. Now, on top of all that, we see how traditional recruitment channels, look, traditional job board advertising and traditional recruitment channels have been increasingly ineffective even prior to the pandemic. But I brought some really good data here too. This is from AppCast annual benchmark report. Last year alone, there was a 43% increase in cost per application. Just think about that for a second. You know, we're all complaining about inflation in this country, and then hot dogs are costing 8% more than they did a year ago. Imagine having a 43% increase in cost per application. Okay, that's a major problem. We're also seeing that the average application rate for RNs in particular is 3.17%, meaning that less than 4 out of every 100 nurses that start an application from a job board actually complete the application. Tells you everything you need to know about the application experience, in particular for registered nurses. It's not desirable. It's not something they want to do, and it needs to be changed. So a lot of these factors, high demand, low supply, applications not really generating the same type of ROI that they used to, are really forcing the hand of healthcare leaders and TA leaders in particular to kind of look for new solutions and to kind of act differently. But I think it's really important, in order to act differently, meaning try new strategies and do different things, it's really important to first think differently. And this is what I was alluding to before about really shifting your thought process to more of a candidate-centric model. So if you think about on the left-hand side, this is usually the way things have traditionally been done, right? Healthcare organization has need. Recruiter posts job. Candidate finds job and applies. Recruiter then does an intake call and screens the applicant. Qualified applicants gets pushed over to an interview, hire is made. But if you notice on that side, the candidate doesn't, it seems very linear, and the candidate doesn't even come into the equation until the middle. Focusing and trying to shift the thought process more to a candidate-centric model, which unfortunately is where we all kind of have to be, right? Candidates are holding all of the cards right now. They have all the leverage in the world and can ultimately apply anywhere they want and probably get a job anywhere they want. I mean, barring some ding on their license or some issue with that, if you're a healthcare professional, you have it made in the shade with lemonade right now because you can take any job you want. So if that's the case and the candidates have the leverage here, focusing the candidate in the center of the equation and providing really different types of experiences around chat and providing great content and easy applies as opposed to applications and virtual engagement options, whether that's live chat or scheduled chat, video content, all of that to create just a tremendous candidate experience to build relationships. This is what successful organizations, this is what they're thinking about. This is how they've shifted their thinking, because if you don't change your thinking, you can't change behaviors. Now, where does this come into in the world of virtual, right? And virtual hiring events and virtual hiring strategies, whatever you want to call them, hiring events, hiring strategies. I think it's a little bit more of a strategy and that the virtual event is part of that strategy. Believe it or not, virtual hiring technology and virtual engagement technology has actually been around for quite some time. I remember piloting virtual hiring platforms well over 10 years ago, and it was a very cool and, as you can imagine, different concept at the time. It was, nobody was doing it, but it really didn't work out of the gate. And a lot of that had to do with the fact that, most computers didn't just really have bandwidth or computing power in order to have an event. Mobile, we didn't really have as many mobile devices. Certainly there wasn't access to Wi-Fi or broadband, and trying to host a virtual event in 2010 was just a problem, mainly for the candidate, and it didn't work. So it doesn't really take off, but about 5 years or so after that, a bunch of really smart people figured out, I think the problem with the way we tried to launch virtual was they tried to recreate an on-site hiring event in a virtual environment, which was the huge mistake, right? Trying to get a candidate to build an avatar and walk around a virtual environment and having booths, it just didn't work. So what they did was figure, well, let's just focus in what's the most important part about virtual engagement, which is the chat. For the same reason you go to Target's website or Walmart's website or Amazon's website and you have a question, what is the experience centered around? It's centered around you chatting back and forth with a representative over there and probably multitasking simultaneously. And once technology started to move in that direction, we started to see virtual hiring and virtual hiring technology really take off from there. Still was more of an ancillary strategy over the last 5 years or so. But then what happens in 2020, March of 2020? Pandemic hits, people are forced into quarantine. And, the idea of having an on-site hiring event was just no bueno at that point, right? I mean, the need to hire nurses and medical professionals didn't go away as a result of the pandemic. It's just you couldn't really invite 200 nurses into a room. It wasn't really a cool idea. So the idea of, well, let's have virtual hiring events really just skyrockets in popularity. And now you see what was low adoption of virtual hiring technology and virtual hiring strategies now becomes at the forefront, right? So it really starts to take off. And virtual hiring, what we're seeing and what the data is telling us, and just what feedback from clients is telling us, is that this is not one of those things that's going away post-pandemic, right? There are a lot of things that the pandemic changed in our personal lives that have since gone away, but this is something that is not only sticking around, but we're seeing healthcare institutions and recruiters double down on. It was effective. It's going to continue to be effective. Let's invest more in a strategy around this. Now, one of the reasons why, and some of the feedback we saw from candidates throughout really ramping up virtual engagements and hospitals having virtual events, is why was this such a desirable experience for them? Well, one, ease of entry and seamless communication, right? Like I said before, for the same reason why you have a problem, Target sends you the wrong package or it's late. For the same reason, you don't want to pick up the phone and wait online for 40 minutes for a representative to talk to you. Candidates don't want to do that either. What do? You go right to the chat button, you instantly connect with an agent, you start chatting with them about your problem, they fix your problem, and you kind of go on your merry way. And candidates, especially nurses who are gainfully employed, not really actively looking, significantly more passive, the idea that they can very, very quickly and seamlessly express interest, get some questions answered, maybe establish next steps. This is why this is becoming the preferred communication and interaction tool as opposed to applying for a job. The other thing we're seeing is anonymity. And this is really in stark contrast mainly to an on-site hiring event. So on-site hiring events, right, which a lot of hospitals and healthcare organizations was just a very tried and true tactic. I mean, I've been doing this for 20 years, and I see healthcare institutions that were having quarterly on-site hiring events, monthly on-site hiring events. That even transitioned into weekly, right? Talent Tuesday, walk-in Wednesday, come down to our organization, punch in cookies, meet our hiring managers, tours of the facility, and that was really successful. What we found, though, once clients started moving or incorporating virtual, is that they were seeing a certain type of candidate that would show up to a virtual event that never would show up to an on-site hiring event. And one of the main reasons cited was anonymity, in that a candidate was fearful of showing up. If you work at ABC Hospital and you're interested maybe in working at XYZ Hospital down the road, there's a fear that if you go to that on-site hiring event, you could run into a coworker, or worse, a hiring manager. I mean, how awkward would that be for a candidate? And it was causing candidates who otherwise might have gone to the event to not go at all in fear that they would run into somebody. Virtual takes care of all of this, right? Because in a virtual environment, none of the candidates see who all the other candidates are. So it's allowed for real passive candidates who would never have dreamed of going to an on-site hiring event to actually express interest. So that's one of the key takeaways here. Ease of entry, seamless communication experience, express interest anonymously with recruiters. This is why this is becoming a desired experience. Now, are virtual hiring events right for your organization? Just because this is a cool concept that is desired by a candidate doesn't necessarily mean that this is something every organization should be doing or needs to be doing. So when you think about, are we ready for some sort of virtual hiring strategy? There's a lot of questions you want to ask yourself. These are just 3 criteria I always pose to, one of my clients. Well, how persistent are your hiring needs? Okay. Do you have spot hiring needs? Or is it more like, we have nursing and nursing support staff. You feel like you hire 10 nurses and then 10 quit the next day. If you have persistent, ongoing hiring needs, then utilizing a virtual strategy as a sourcing tactic is a great strategy, right? To keep an ongoing influx of candidates. Now, let's say you haven't hired pharmacists in 2 years and your pharmacist quits. I wouldn't recommend hosting a hiring event, a virtual hiring event for pharmacy candidates. That's probably more of a, a job board strategy or a paid search strategy. Criteria 2, what does your team's bandwidth look like? If you have a recruitment team where you have dedicated recruiters, dedicated sourcers, you have recruitment marketers on staff, you have an incredible amount of bandwidth and might not necessarily need to host virtual hiring events. But if your bandwidth is, we don't have marketers on staff, we're not working well with our corporate marketing team, they're not giving us any support. Oh, and by the way, our recruiters are now being asked to source on top of recruiting, then your recruiters have incredibly low bandwidth. One of the great things about virtual for bandwidth constrained recruiters is it allows you to source without sourcing. I don't know any nurse recruiter or hospital recruiter that sits there and vets applications all day long and does screening calls with applicants and checks in with hiring managers all day long. I don't know any recruiter that does that all day and also at the end of the day has time to go out and make 50 phone calls or send out huge talent community blasts. They just don't really have the bandwidth and quite frankly, the desire to do that. So if bandwidth is low, rather than proactively hunting candidates, just invite them to a virtual hiring event because it doesn't require an application for a candidate to get into a hiring event. They can register for it with a short form. So it's a great way for recruiters to leverage their time and pick up sourcing. What about out of market? If you feel the need to target talent outside of your market, which happens from time to time, it would be great if you just had ample supply of candidates right in your backyard, but let's face it, that's sometimes a Skittles and rainbows mentality. It's a bit of a fantasy world that doesn't exist. So if you need to target beyond your geo and you want to target regionally or even nationally, if you target nationally, candidates who live 3 states over are not going to apply to one of your jobs. They're just not going to do that. And they definitely are not going to jump in a car and go to an on-site hiring event. That's not going to happen. But a candidate could register and attend a virtual hiring event who lives across the country just as easily as a candidate who lives across the street. So it's a great tactic if you want to expand your footprint and target regional or even national talent. Now, let's say you're buying into the concept of, okay, this is good. We should really start to build a strategy around, virtual hiring. Well, what are some of the things that you might want to consider, right? So how do you choose a virtual hiring platform? I would say, look, you want to start with cost. Now, not that that should dictate everything, but realize you have budgets and you want to keep things within a certain budget. So you want to look at cost, but more importantly, cost transparency. You want to make sure that you don't have hidden costs or hidden fees, and the price you're quoted today changes 6 months from now or 6 weeks from now because you've run out of credits or whatever it is, right? So you want to make sure that you're buttoned up on cost transparency from the get-go. Intuitive software, quick implementation. It's got to be simple to use. It has to be very, very easy to use, right? Otherwise, you're not going to use it. And if you don't use it, you're not going to get ROI on it and you're going to get frustrated. Same thing with implementation. How many different applications are recruiters using? How many are you using? You have your ATS. You might have a CRM. You have an HRIS system. You have, different job boards that you might have, interactions with. You have your background check company. You have your references. You have a lot of software out there. So it needs to be really, really easy to implement, right? Finally, or not finally, onboarding support, right? Is this you have to do all the training yourself, or are you working with a partner that's going to provide onboarding support, not just initially, but throughout your relationship? Because there's training that will happen when you engage a virtual hiring platform, but your team today could look different than your team 6 weeks from now or 6 months from now. Maybe you have new recruiters on staff. Maybe you are bringing hiring managers in. Well, who's providing the onboarding support for new team members? Is that going to be you? Ideally, you don't want to do that because that's a little bit, that's going to strain your bandwidth even further. So you want to work with a partner that's going to provide that type of training and support along the way. And finally, event promotion, right? Because all of these things cost. and how easy the software is and quick implementation and support. All of those things could be check, 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 check. But if candidates don't show up to your event, then all of those are meaningless, because that's what it all comes down to. It's recruiters having meaningful chats, meaningful connections with candidates, generating applicants and generating hires. So you really want to work in an environment and with a partner that can help you with that most important part, getting people to register for your event. Now, best practices, right? Best practices for virtual hiring events. I like to break it down into a before, during, and after. Before, timing is everything. And what do I mean by that? I mean, when are you going to host the event? Should you host an event the day before, the Friday before Labor Day? No. Should you host the event that's coinciding with the Super Bowl? No. Should you host an event that is, on back to school night in your local market? No. So you want to make sure that you're not competing with other popular things that are going on, and host an event at the appropriate time, typically midweek, during the day, or even after hours. Or again, the benefit of virtual is that you could do multiple times throughout the day, but timing is everything. Inviting the right team, meaning your team. How many recruiters should be there, manning the chat session? Should you have sourcers there? I would argue if you do have sourcers, 100% you should have your sourcers there. Hiring managers, that's a big dicey question I get all the time. Should hiring managers take part in our virtual hiring events? I would say that's case by case. Now, if you are going to invite hiring managers to your event, typically the feedback I get, or the negative feedback I get from clients who have hiring managers, is that hiring managers are taking the initial chats, and they shouldn't be. You want to think more of hiring managers in the background. So recruiters and sourcers do initial chats with candidates, vet them for qualifications, and if they are qualified and interested, then you refer them over to the hiring manager, who kind of sits in the background. You shouldn't really have hiring managers doing any of the initial qualifications and screening. And then also, creating your battle plan. One of the great things about a candidate registering for an event, whether it's an on-site event or a virtual event, is they're going to do that in advance of the event. So 2 weeks before, 10 days before, you're going to see a list of candidates that have registered with their skill sets, with their practice area, with their years of experience. Hopefully they've attached a resume. So you want to vet your list of registrants and potential attendees with your team prior to the event. This way, you can almost have an agreement with the other recruiters. Okay, if this candidate comes into the environment, I'm going to be the one that goes after them and starts the chat session with them, because I have a job requisition that this person is perfect for. So kind of creating that battle plan prior will help a lot of last minute scrambling during the event. Now, you are, during the event, right, doing your prep work. And what do I mean by that? If you're chatting with a candidate and that candidate, hey, says, this is really cool, I'm interested. Do you have a list of benefits? I'd love to review that policy. You want to make sure, if you have that on a link, or if you have that on a PDF somewhere, you want to make sure you have that at the ready, so that you could just post that link right into the chat session, or attach that PDF right in the chat session to the candidate. Let's not make candidates wait. If candidates ask about specific jobs, you want to make sure you have your ATS or your career site open in a different screen, so that you could grab a job or a couple of job recs, post the links right into the chat, and hopefully the candidate will go and apply. So doing that prep work up front is really important. Communication is key. And by that, I mean with your team. So you want to communicate. Let's say it's you, 2 other recruiters, and 3 hiring managers. Communicating during your event internally, what's working, what's not working. Hey, I referred this candidate over to you. Curious to see if you've established an interview date with them. Communicating during the event with your team is critical. And then finally, establishing next steps. You're having a chat with a candidate, whether it's a text chat, video chat, or whatever it is. Everything looks great. You're interested in them, they're interested in you. You're about to end the session. Never, ever end that session with a good lead without establishing next steps, whether that's something that's going to be put on the calendar, or even if you've already scheduled, let's say, an interview date or a call with the hiring manager. So always establish those next steps. And then finally, afterwards, certainly you want to debrief with your team. What worked? What didn't work? How can we make this better? What can we do to improve? How can we get more candidates into the environment? All those different things that you want to make sure you debrief with your team so that each subsequent event becomes more successful. Keeping in touch. I would say you should expect on average anywhere from 40 to 60% of registrants actually attend the event. So let's even that out at 50, right? Let's say 100 nurses register for your event. Most likely about 50 are going to actually attend. The other 50 won't, for a litany of reasons, right? Life got in the way, they changed their mind, whatever it is. You want to make sure you keep in touch, not only with the candidates that you did chat with and maybe are interested in the future, but you definitely want to stay in touch with those candidates that did not register. Make sure you stay top of mind with them. And then finally, rinse and repeat. If you've established and you've invested in a virtual hiring strategy, then you definitely want to continue to do it, right? The more you do it, the better you're going to get at it. The more hours in your day you're going to get back from your time, because now your sourcing is taken care of. And this is really what I was talking about, those Talent Tuesdays or those Walk-in Wednesdays. I see a lot of successful recruiters now who just have a regular, every Wednesday, they're hosting a virtual event from 2 to 4. And they drive as many candidates to register for it. Some weeks they have 50 candidates who they're chatting with in that 2-hour window. Some days it's 25. Some days it's 10. Sometimes it's 70. The point is you keep that regular event going. And if you're walking away each event with, 7, 8, 9, 10 hires, I see clients that are making 20 hires on the spot. They're extending 20 offers on the spot. And if you could do that in a consistent basis, I think that's all the more beneficial. So that kind of brings us to the end. I see that we have a couple of questions here, and a couple of people have sent me some questions simultaneously. So I have a few minutes left to go here. One question is about leadership and convincing leadership to get on board. I think, honestly, the best thing you can do, if this is something that you want to do, right? You want to invest, and you want your team to invest in a virtual hiring strategy, but ultimately you need to get approval from leadership. The best thing you could do is not just go to leadership with the problem, but also go with the solution, right? That's what leaders really want. So approaching leadership and saying, look, we're not able to source effectively. We have low bandwidth. We know there's a huge appetite for virtual, and that's really what the candidate experience needs to revolve around. So we want to do it. And here's a few options for us. We've already vetted 2 or 3 vendors we think we can partner with. So-and-so is going to take the lead on it. That's the best way to approach leadership with not just the problem, but also a bit of the solution as well. Let's see, I got another question coming in here about timing. Oh, yeah, so we kind of covered that. Maybe you came in a little late. Timing. When should you host the event? I think, again, you want to host them as regular as possible. You want to make them not conflicting with anything popular that's going on, because if it's the Final Four tournament or your hiring event, chances are those candidates are going to watch that on TV as opposed to going to a hiring event. Oh, and then here's another one: expectations on attendance. Again, like I said, about 50%. If you get 100 nurses to register, you should expect about 50% to attend. If you're seeing anything lower than that, let's say you're seeing your registrant to attendance rate is at 20%. I wouldn't panic if it's your first event, but if you're doing multiple events and you're routinely seeing 10, 15, 20% of your registrants attend, I think you got to take a step back. Is the barrier of entry too much? Are you asking candidates to do too many things? Is your timing off? So if you're seeing that low registration to attendance rate, I think you want to take a step back and look at, well, how are we asking candidates to get into the environment? So that neatly brings us up to the 2:30 Eastern time mark. I will send out a copy of this to everyone that did attend and follow up from there. Here's all my contact information. If anybody has questions, wants to chat, wants to learn more, or just needs any advice on getting started with virtual hiring, certainly let me know. Feel free to reach out. Be happy to help out. Hope everybody learned something from here. Hope you all have a great day. Thank you.